Okay, welcome everyone. It's right at 3 o'clock, actually 3:01. We're going to get started. Appreciate everybody being on time. We're going to try to stay on time. The session today is innovative technology, and we have three speakers. Our first one is Brett Peshek? Peshek, okay. I've tried. But Brett is from Cover Crop Cattle Company and grew up in a small town in Nebraska. His passion was with wildlife and animals, but went to school for agronomy and entrepreneurship with hopes to own his own business one day. He interned with Green Cover Seed and was hired out of college to become their southern sales agronomist for Oklahoma and Texas. As he settled, he began his career as a producer in 2017 with a cow-calf operation. Later bought a farm on his own in 2019, that's pretty impressive, and currently runs cattle, sheep, goats, pastured pigs, chickens, and managed intensively for wildlife habitat. He now sells USDA pastured pork and grass-fed beef cuts directly to the consumer from his operation. So with that, let's give a warm round of applause for Brett.
Thank you. So today I'm going to talk a little bit, I know we're in innovative technology, so I'm talking a little bit about how I apply my farm operation. The innovative technology is not necessarily anything new, it's just looking at ecosystems and how I can manage my farm profitably to generate income. One thing I'd like to add is I'm a first-generational farmer. Farming has been in my background. My grandfather had a ranch in western Nebraska. I grew up on a small acreage in central Nebraska on about 8 acres, but I always had a passion to being on the farm and wanting to have my own farm someday. And so, that was a big step for me of how do I get started as a first-generational farmer. Taking out loans to get started, scared me to death. And so obviously with being with Green Cover starting out, I knew about regenerative agriculture. I was surrounded by very smart people and have been able to learn off the backs of many other people with experimenting. And so I'm going to talk about, what's working for me getting started as a farmer. I don't have a big operation, but it's something that I'll share my failures and my successes on this. So, Mimicking Nature's Complex Simplicity is my title. I know it's kind of an oxymoron, but it's something that I look at nature and, I believe that we've had a perfect design, and it's the realization of observing and seeing that perfect design and how we can take advantage of it and mimic it in our own operation. So I live in Mountain View, Oklahoma. I run cattle, sheep, goats, pasture pigs, and poultry. Right now I'm managing about 560 acres between what I own and what I lease and am partnered on. I seed diverse cover crops and perennials back on cropland. I'm doing a no fertilizer program on my farm at the moment, and so it's something that I really just focus on. What can I graze, what nature gives me, including weeds. I know people scoff at weeds, but I use them as a cash resource as well between one of the animals that I raise. And then pastures, I have a mixed pastures of old world blue stem, true native grass, and then improved species like Bermuda grass. And then I frequently overseed pastures with annual cover crops, biennials, and other perennials to elongate my grazing seasons and to add more diversity into monoculture scenarios. So I'd like to talk about this food web first. In my region in southwest Oklahoma, this is kind of a food web of ecosystem that you would find in that region. And particularly, we focus on mimicking bison with cattle as migratory animals. I'm going to kind of talk more about the small ruminants and then some of these other species that, like the grasshopper, the prairie chicken, The prairie dogs, those weren't really, nobody really focuses on those guys. They're not big, they haven't been chalked up to being big contributors to the ecosystem. Everybody focused on the bison. And so I'm going to talk about how those other species actually benefit me as a beginning farmer and getting started as a producer to make money. And so pests of the grasslands, I know everybody has either pocket gophers or prairie dogs or some other rodent out there that they have tried to kill. But this study was done in Mexico on the black-tailed prairie dogs. This right here, and it's a metric units here. This prairie dogs with grasslands, the grasslands without prairie dogs, and then mesquite rangeland mix after they eliminated prairie dogs. So it's comparing rainfall infiltration, water infiltration, and then overall grass production. And so everybody thought prairie dogs ate the food for their cattle, but it turns out that the prairie dogs added a lot of services to that ecosystem through water infiltration. We have more water infiltration, we can grow more forages. And so this was done in Mexico, just to give an example. Now, I don't raise prairie dogs off of my farm as economics, but I do pastured pigs, which is a big swear word in the South. If I think every other talk I hear about, and an extension is how do we eradicate pigs. And so I have had a few of my neighbors try to eradicate my pigs on my place for me. Not a great experience, but it's something that we're learning and teaching about. How do I manage pastured pigs and pigs on rangeland in an area that's infested with wild pigs? Everybody sees their damage. I want to hopefully train you or open your eyes to some of the benefits that they can offer on an operation. The picture in the background is a place where I have kind of let go native. It was kind of a wetland area that would flood very frequently. It had a lot of water runoff into that field. I seeded cover crops in there with the pigs as they stirred the soils. And you can see, native grasses and native wildflowers moved in with that. And then I add in some native grass seeds into the hog feed. I supplement a barley in that system. Hogs being a simple gut, they don't digest fiber very well, so native grass seeds pass through them very well, and then you got this perfect little mineral packet for that plant to grow. And so hogs do a great job for me for dispersing seeds and getting native species back on the rangeland or pasture land or cropland. And the one thing I like about it also is, again, on the ecosystem instance, we're also fixing other problems. Breaking fly cycles, that's a big problem in the cattle industry. Pigs do a great job of breaking up manure pats, and then also haystacks. If you had a bale ring with hay or hay piles, that's a big contributor to a lot of your stable flies. Hogs do a great job of disturbing those areas, breaking up those fly pest issues, and then improving water infiltration. I know the water infiltration is will throw a question mark to a lot of people, but like the prairie dog, I manage the pigs on heavy slopes on areas that might be primarily buffalo grass. Buffalo grass is really well known for growing on shallow soils, but the problem is it doesn't have a lot of residue. And so what happens is the water runs off very quickly. We can't infiltrate that water if that water runs off very quickly because we don't have residue. And so by managing the pigs up on the slopes, we build mini terraces. Yes, my pasture would be terrible to golf in because it's rough in the certain areas, but it slows that water off that soil. It mimics what some people would call a keyline design on creating terraces to keep the water up on the higher slopes. And so I use pigs to mimic that in a way to slow down that water and improve that water infiltration. And this is what we start to see. That red line you can see right there is to the left. I've had pigs there. To the right, I had not had pigs on that piece of that property. You can see the green, the dark green, the photosynthetic capabilities where I added the diversity and where I added the fertility through the pigs. It's not moonscaped. The big thing is rotation, not leaving them in the same spot. They can be destructive animals like everything else, but adding rotation and diversity, we can bring back soils. And who was in here with Alan Williams talking about the chickens and all the other species? Anybody hear that talk? So chickens are another one that are kind of like the pig. They can be very destructive if left in one spot for a really long time, but because these animals need supplemental feed, you're bringing in a lot of fertility onto that landscape and then using the animals to spread that fertility out there. Again, I don't buy commercial fertilizers, but I do buy feed, and then it puts it out on the landscape for me. So I harvest proteins directly off that feed. This is after 2 years of raising pigs on pasture. As you can see, side oats grama, buffalo grass. We're starting to get some big blue stems move in on uplands, which is very shallow soils. This before you start to get into a gravelly rock, there's only about 2 inches of topsoil here. And this is in a climate with about 25 average inches of rainfall. And that's a 600-pound sow out there. She's about as big as a cow. And so you can kind of see the residue that we can build through adding pigs on pasture in there. So chickens, the other part of my operation, I get seasonal free-range chickens, spent hens. They are my grasshopper control. The pest can turn into a food source or a profitability. I'm a tightwad, so I hate spending money. I was looking at chemically terminating the grasshoppers because they were eating so much of my forages that I had available for sheep and cattle. Consequently, I had a coworker find me some chickens, and as spent hens, they cost me very little money. And I didn't want to get into the egg business because I didn't want to wash eggs 24 hours a day. But I knew there was a big demand for hens for people's backyards. And so I would buy these spent hens that come from commercial operations, run them on my pastures, kind of background. It's almost like stocker chickens or stocker cattle in a way. And I would sell them for people's in the backyard. So I ended up profiting about $7,000 in the first year of running about 1,500 chickens versus spending $7,000 in chemical cost. Over 500 acres and being a small producer, changing your economic flow by $14,000 is very big in 1 year. And so I see that as a bigger part of my operation going forward. And most of the eggs I either donated to the neighbors, customers that were buying my pork. If they ordered bacon and sausage, they'd get a dozen of eggs to go with. So it made a great side product that made the consumer happy. They were getting a fresh product for free. It was a great add-on for my meat, but it was eliminating a huge cost. And then if they wanted the chickens for their backyard, I would sell them to them. And then any extra dirty eggs, because I really don't like washing eggs, those went to the pigs. So that's the nice thing about having a regular ecosystem on your farm is there is no waste. And so pigs and chickens are great for that. I do sheep and goats. I use them more for brush control, seasonal stalkers on the goats. I tried to run goats through the winter. That's not really fun because they hate cold and wet winds. And so anytime that we'd have a cold rain and it was windy, they were trying to get out. When it's hot and humid, they love it out there. They live on the hottest part of the countryside. They love sitting on the hill slopes, the bare areas, things like that. But they do great for brush control. So I run goats as stalkers. I buy lightweight stalkers and bring them in seasonally as I have demand for them or time for them. The sheep, I have more of a perennial asset on my farm. Again, they're targeting unwanted weeds like broomweed and western ragweed. I'm breeding them to be lambing twice a year on the operation. Again, mimicking the ecosystem, antelope, deer, those smaller ruminants, they were animals that didn't migrate near as far as the bison. They would migrate, 10, 15, 20 miles to food sources. But in our ecosystem, the sheep and the goats stayed, or the antelope and the deer stayed more put in one place, where the bison might travel thousands of miles. And so as a small producer, it's easier for me to keep sheep and goats on a property and be profitable than keeping a cow-calf herd on that same system. And so here's a picture of the stalker goats that I use. They love greenbrier. I was doing polynet through the trees, but I got tired of dragging that through greenbrier, and so I did get them switched to a 2-wire hot wire system. Again, I really like focusing on habitat. One thing in our area is we don't have a lot of wild turkeys because the underbrush is so overgrown. And so another terminology what I do is I call it mineral stumps or tree stumps. I will hack off the trees about waist high. I don't spray them. I let them sucker out because goats love all those suckers that come off those stumps. But if there was a heavy rain to come through, all those tree stumps are still waist high, slowing the water down. But we open up that canopy for grasses and legumes and other species, and then open up the canopy for turkeys or quail. A lot of bobcats, coyotes wipe out a lot of our wild turkey populations in our area because the bottoms are so overgrown. They can't get to roost trees, or they won't roost in trees that have really thick brush underneath of them. Again, I'm trying to harvest those grasshoppers through any way possible. Plus, wildlife add a great benefit to income in lots of places in Oklahoma and Texas. And so on the cattle side, I did start out as a cow-calf herd. I still have some cow-calf for my beef operation. I have transitioned more to a stalker to, again, mimic that bison moving through seasonally in my area. So I can have it's a lot easier for me to control on a small acreage stalker cattle on a seasonal basis than trying to keep a cow around all year round. And so that's really helped out on cutting out winter feed costs and things like that. I have kept my cows all year round, and through this and doing cover crops and the diversity, I really haven't fed hardly any hay because I can flux in animals and I flux out animals. So using the stalkers is a really good source for me, and then limiting my equipment. This is my equipment right here. I got one tractor, and that's my no-till drill. It's a 6-row corn planter. It's a lot cheaper than a no-till drill, but I interseed my pastures with that. And I have rented a drill, but with the prices of everything this year, renting a drill has gotten really expensive. And so I bought this last year, and it's worked really well for me. It's very simple. I'm not a mechanic, and so I can easily work on that, fix bearings, and it serves the purposes of getting the seed out there. I let Mother Nature do the work for me. I've used the animals to trample the seed in certain areas. I've broadcasted seed a lot of times, but just getting the seed out there, this is a simple, cheap way for me to get that out there. Pasture overseeding has been very big for me. Getting the quality feed out there in native grasses and getting other species going. I typically add legumes or other broadleafs. I don't want a grass monoculture. I firmly believe a lot of our native plants are broadleaf species. And so getting those broadleaves out there are equally as important. You know, you might have 4 or 5 grasses and it may not be a true monoculture, but I still call it a grass monoculture. And the biology that I see from doing this has greatly responded. These are spring peas that I've done into Bermuda grass. This picture was actually taken December 5th, 2 years ago. They were seeded in August. This is stockpiling protein in what would be low protein Bermuda grass, but there's plenty of energy. The neighbor was actually baling up his Bermuda grass that had hardly any quality to it across the road the same day I took that. The nice thing about these spring peas is they tolerate a frost. They're rapid to grow because they have a lot of stored energy in them. They've just really worked well for me. They're cheap, and I use them in a lot of my grass scenarios. But I do have to plant them, and so that's where that planters come in. Here's some more pasture overseeding that I've done. Plantain, chicory are biennial plants that have a lot of natural deworming characteristics. Cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, everything really likes those species. The best part is they're really hard to kill. And so for me, I don't like to spray anything. I know people do want to, but it's something that if I can have living, growing plants on my operation, I can find an animal that will utilize it. I don't necessarily, it's not my job to change the landscape. I would rather use the landscape that I'm dealt with and change my management to it. And so that's worked well for me. Here's some of the pasture overseeding. I did do some warm seasons this year with that planter. You can see they're on 30-inch rows, but that's down there on the grass where I planted. Sorghums, cowpeas, legumes. Not all parts of the field looked like this, but where the trees curved around and slowed down the wind, that's something that where these cover crops got really big and added a lot of biomass. That's one thing that I'm adding into my operation as I go forward is do more of a silvopasture to slow down the wind speed. That's one thing that we're well known for in western Oklahoma is the wind. And so I'm wanting to put more tree rows in to slow down the wind to increase biomass production on my forages, whether it be perennial or annual. And so soil health, you know, wrapping all the ecosystem up, it all ties back into soil health. All these pests and predators and beneficials all boil down to soil health and ecosystem health. And so I'm trying to better a future, build an operation that I can pass on to my future kids down the road. I want to build something for them and something for the future. This is where I've been overseeding into Bermuda grass for 2 years. I took these pictures after 2 years. I did a grazing trial right next to it where I did high density grazing, adaptive grazing style on the same Bermuda grass pasture. And then right across the fence, I did the same adaptive grazing management, but I added the legume species, the broadleaf species in. Where I added the legume species in what was a pure Bermuda stand, I had a lot bigger response of earthworms come in, largely because it was a high carbon scenario, and so there wasn't very much organic nitrogen. Again, I didn't fertilize, and so there was no organic fertilizer or organic nitrogen for the earthworms where I didn't seed. And so after 2 years, this is about 4 inches of color change in about 2 years where I started interseeding the species, and you can see the earthworms from there. So that has me really excited going forward, but it's been a great tool for me being more economical on my farm as a small producer. So any questions?
Brent, have you been satisfied with the 30-inch row spacing?
Because I don't spray or don't chemically terminate, I've been really pleased with it. Probably the bigger challenging part of that, if you are going into cropland, is realizing your succession of weeds that come with that. Understanding plant cycles, all plants have a succession of, putting seed on, maturing out, going dormant. And I try to target that when I seed. So, for instance, I had one pasture go primarily crabgrass. And so going in June for me was really hard to put in warm seasons, but I can go in early spring or early fall when crabgrass begins to cycle out. And so I try to use what's there with the weeds because they're doing a job. They're trying to do the same thing as the cover crops and fix the soil. I'm just trying to get as much diversity out there and then again adapt my farm management or my animals to what I'm dealt with. Whether I get a solid stand of mare's tail, that's great. I got goats. If I got crabgrass, I got cattle or sheep or pigs or chickens. And so I have probably the worst terrible grazing planning on my farm because you just don't know what's going to happen. And so I just try to observe, walk out, observe what's going on my farm. How can I change my management practices today to what I'm dealt with? And again, I try to keep I've made plenty of mistakes. I try to keep all the principles of soil health in play. There's times that I've messed up and didn't, but the great thing about nature and ecosystems is it responds back to a mistake. And it ends up benefiting, another enterprise on my farm.
And we have time for one more question, but I didn't do my job. Could you just repeat that question and Brett, you say it because we have this recorded and we can't hear the question on the recording. So I can't remember what the question was. But.
It was basically, were you satisfied with the 30-inch drill? I was just, because I was concerned about the potential of either not maximizing your forage production,
Yes.
getting out through there, or if you found that you got enough forage growth out of that spacing.
Yep.
Yeah, so if you could paraphrase the question.
So the question was, am I satisfied with a 30-inch spacing, being that I went cheaper to get the seeds out there? And my answer is yes, because I'm not scared of weeds. They're a forage for me. And so whatever I don't fill in, nature fills in for me.
Right, okay, great. And if they have one more question, let's take one more because we're right on time. But are there any other questions? Okay, go ahead.
Just real quick on that 1,200 chickens, are you just chucking them off there, or how are you looking at them?
So the question,
go ahead and repeat
the question was, what am I doing with 1,200 chickens? Yes. So the quick story was, my coworker spoke for 1,000 chickens. And this is how it got in. I had a grasshopper problem. I needed some remedy. My coworker spoke for 1,000 chickens on a Monday, and I picked them up on a Thursday. And so I didn't have much of a plan. They were very, very cheap that I really didn't care. And my guard dogs adapted to them pretty well. This year going forward, I'm going to try to run about 4,000 hens. And I'm setting up cotton trailers to rotate better on pasture out there because I firmly believe that chickens are a great way to bring in fertility and profit and add a lot of economic value per acre.
All right. Brett, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. All right, that was a great presentation, and as moderator, I've got to tell you, it's great to have speakers that give good information on time, because we are right at 3:30 where we need to be. Well, Brett did great.